Welcome to the podcast Eternal, where we'll be reviewing biblical studies, theology, news of the day from a Christian point of view, and no politics. I'm your host, David Gear, former Assembly of God minister and author of the book Eternal and subsequent sequel, Resistance. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me on the podcast Eternal. This is the very first podcast, and I will be starting off by talking about my testimony. So the very first episode, and I'll do my best to get this all into a single podcast. It may become a two-part podcast. We will see where we go from there. Of course, as you know, those of you who are believers, you know that we can do nothing in ourselves, in our own wisdom, but we always seek the wisdom of God and His Word to accomplish anything that is true, just, and to ultimately, obviously, grow in Christ. And that is what this podcast is all about. It's about growing and strengthening each other, myself as well included. I do not wish to glorify myself or bring any honor to myself in this podcast. That's not what this is about, because it's not about each one of us, but rather us growing and strengthening one another and lifting each other up, and obviously reaching the lost and those who are out there in the world who have nowhere to turn that they know of, and in themselves or their own wisdom, the wisdom of the world, which is not what we seek. We seek God's wisdom ultimately, and that's this channel. Eternal is all about that. And as you heard, there is a book, a novel, called Eternal. It is a fiction. That book is kind of what launched all of this originally, even though that was just over 7 years ago. That is the foundation for, I believe, what this will turn into in the future. So we will begin, like I said, this is the only time I intend to give this testimony. Truthfully, I've never really given my testimony before, not fully, not really in any setting. I will try not to go into too much detail. I will keep it somewhat vague. We don't have time in a short podcast or even two podcasts to really go into super detail. Though that's not the purpose of this to begin with. So, like I said, my name is David Gear. I started off early in my childhood, rough, of course, from the actually very beginning. I always joke with people that the devil's been coming after me since day one, trying to kill me. That's only a joke, but I've said that pretty much my entire life. I was informed early on that I was born 6 months and 2 weeks, so super preemie. I weighed 1 pound. The reason I say that the devil tried to take me out early is they had to put me in an incubator for a couple months after I actually died in the womb. And I don't know, the stories vary on how long that was. and later on, they would say that I had developmental disabilities, and my own mother would say the same. That stemmed from all of that. Multiple accidents after that, as well as a young kid. Acted out quite a bit in rebellion as a youth, just because the home growing up, it wasn't great. My parents, they were very young. My father was super young as well. Becoming a dad as a teenager, not knowing what to do, nor to handle a kid like me with the situation, with the way that I was. And then, of course, I lashed out in anger, not knowing how to deal with things. But from there, it got to a point, I think I was about 8 or 9, my parents divorced. I ran away from home. I became a little violent, I guess. Ran away from home, and my dad was by himself, not knowing how to deal with me. I mean, he was only 29 years old when I ran away from home, and when they got divorced. So I was sent to a children's home, first a psych ward for about 4 months, and then they did studies on me, trying to see if I was on the spectrum and things like that. Before all that happened, they were just trying to figure out what was going on with me. And I was super hyperactive, super, I guess, slow in learning certain things, creative brain, but couldn't really grasp technical things very well. Math, wasn't able to hold a pencil, little things like that. I couldn't hold a pencil until a later time when other kids would, You're in 2nd grade and you can't write and things like that. And that learning would be a struggle all the way through high school. I was in special education classes all the way through middle school and high school. And of course, when I was in the children's home, we were living in New York at that time, so I lived in New York until 1995, so I was born in 1981, but we were in New York, and I was sent away to a children's home in Kingston. This was about 1990, I would say, 1990, and so it was 3 years that I was in the children's home, and of course bullied as usual. And in that kind of situation, it's kind of like a foster situation, and the way things were back in that time, they were also still they were giving us, I guess it was a new drug at the time, but it was called Ritalin back. It is now, everyone knows it as Ritalin. I think it was called something else originally, but we were kind of the original group of kids that were taking that, and so taking that would make me tired, and they would offset it with something else so that I wouldn't get tired, and try to learn, and best I could, as they would teach me in special classes, although I would excel in things like art and other stuff like that. So it would be about 3 years before I would go back home. My dad picked me up. It's a date that I would remember the rest of my life, the day that I left the children's home and got to go live with my dad again. And it was August 28th, 1993. And that was a great day. It seemed like a new beginning. like things would be different now. We were both a little bit older. Um, I would go to live with my dad for, from then on. And it wasn't long after that we moved to Middletown, New York. My dad was a manager of a movie theater, a Lowe's movie theater, and I would go stay there in lieu of a babysitter. After school, I would be at the movie theater, so I saw every movie, and of course my creative brain, I pretty much saw every movie in that time frame, all the way until we left in 95. Made me want to be an actor for a long time, though that never panned out. From there, I still had struggles, and I still had issues. I guess discipline from my dad was hard. Actual love was hard, showing love, and maybe that's why I acted out all the time when I was younger, because that was the only time I seemed to get attention from my father. And my mom was pretty much gone at that point. As soon as they divorced, before I even left the children's home, my mom took my brothers and moved across the country, so I wouldn't see her for, it was 4 years that I didn't see her. And then my dad, when we were living in Middletown, asked me at one point, he goes, this is the winter of 1994, going into 1995, asked me if I wanted to go visit or wanted to stay and move to Oregon, and I said stay. And this was the hope that my dad did that so that I could have some kind of relationship with my mother at that point, which was a good idea. So we moved from there, and started going to high school at McNary and Kaiser. Went there, and then wasn't long after started making some friends, good friends, young life friends. And my dad was going to this church. He met what would become my stepmom. I started going to church, and there was this group called Young Life, and they I guess David Leah Broughton and his sister and a few others. We were at the cafeteria, and I'd only gone a couple times to Young Life, but we were in the cafeteria at the high school there. This was in 95, I believe, and springtime. And that's when I got saved for the first time. Still didn't fully know what that meant, of course. None of us as Christians do right off the bat know that all of that, what that entails. But just knowing at the time, believing, of course, putting your faith in Jesus and his resurrection and what he did for all of us. And that's all I knew. It was real simple, and it was fresh, and of course new and exciting the way it always is when at the very beginning. And you feel like you don't know anything, but it did. Even then, it kind of felt like this weight, like something separate, something different, because I didn't really understand what love was. I didn't understand what parental love was, and so I had a misunderstanding of it. Things happened to me when I was younger, and so I won't go into too much detail, but it gave me a skewed version physically of what love was, and I won't mention, but you can probably guess what happened when I was in the children's home to me, but there's no need to go into too much on that. So, interestingly enough, I was kind of torn between two worlds a little bit because I accepted Christ, but I still didn't know Him, and still had a very troubled life leading up to that point, and not really, and then there was a new person in the home. I had a stepmom now, someone who I clashed with, and it changed the dynamic, and I didn't understand, and there's a lot of things that just, it felt like me and my brothers, like we were being replaced a little bit, and I didn't understand. It seemed like we weren't enough, at least not for my father. I didn't really get that, why. It seemed like, like I wasn't enough. He needed to go out. Of course, I mean, yes, he didn't necessarily need to be single. Of course not. But then, my stepsister, it seemed like we were being replaced, a new family, and the old family, like, wanted to separate himself as far as he could from, and start over. So there was that, and eventually we would butt heads, and I would end up going homeless in my senior year of high school. I went homeless right before spring break, and I thought I was smart, thought I knew what I was doing. I could save the money. I didn't need my parents anymore. Didn't need my stepmom, didn't need my dad, my leaning on my own understanding. And like I said, I didn't have that foundation. I didn't have a real relationship, not a daily one, We go to church on Sundays, but never really, it never really hit home, not for me personally. And so obviously if you don't do that, you don't change, not for real. And so I went homeless, and that was a shock. So it was actually my birthday. I went homeless. I guess it was technically 2 days before my birthday, but I went homeless, and pretty much like 8, 9 o'clock at night, I spent my first night in a bus stop in the pouring rain, cold, in Salem, Oregon. So a lot of things happened to me at that time. A lot of things happened in that time of homelessness. I would be homeless from 1999, 18 years old, until the following June 15th of 2000. And it would shock you to know all the things that happened. I'm not going to get into that right now here, but a lot of bad things. It seemed like bad things followed me, and didn't know how to deal with them. So, I just went with the flow, whatever anyone else was doing, drinking, drugs, meth, smoking meth. When you're homeless, any kind of separation from your current situation that you feel trapped in, even if it's momentary, you latch onto it. People wonder why homeless people do start doing drugs in the first place. For them, it's not about peer pressure so much as it's an escape. It may not be real, but it feels real at the time. So from there, I actually ended up riding the rails, and I actually started riding trains, grain cars. I met somebody that knew how, and I had talked to people, and I never thought that would happen to me. But after I had a messed up situation, I got beat up in Portland, and I was left with pretty much nothing. It was about February of 2000, and I was told by these gentlemen who beat me up in Portland, by Gresham High School that I needed to leave town or they were going to throw me off of what they called Suicide Bridge. So that's what I was going to do. They said, don't come back to the state or we'll kill you. So I left. That's what I did. Obviously, I wouldn't come back there. I wouldn't test it or stick around. I took the bus, and that bus only went to Vancouver. This has been another episode of the Eternal Podcast, and we thank you for your listening and support. Don't forget, you can pick up your very own copy of Eternal by David Gear at Amazon.com, as well as other merchandise, sweatshirts, hoodies, zip-up hoodies, and t-shirts as well at Amazon.com.